We're live on the air. Greetings and welcome back once again. This is Yisrael. Like, why am I doing my hands like this? This is Olaudah Yisrael, Solar Dynamics 101, the LEV project. And a very excited time for many reasons. Today is the 100th, not today, but this is going to be the 100th reading or installment or episode of the LEV project. And I wanted it to do it today. Please excuse I woke up early this morning getting ready. There's a storm coming up here on the East Coast. And so we have to get prepared. And then I said to myself, well, let me do all I got to do just in case the lights go out. So I wanted to read because today, if I don't read today, then tomorrow, then it keeps going on and on and on. And so I wanted to read a first installment because I've been saying this for a minute. We just finished A Girl's Life in Virginia Before the War. See my little close sign here. And so I want to thank everybody for joining us who will watch this. The link is in the box. If you're like me, I like reading out the book. So this one I have the book for, so I'll be reading from the book. But if you want to order the book, the link is there. If you want to read online, the link is there. If you would like to read, just let me know, and we can do that as well. So I just wanted to say, hey, usually I'm a little bit more hype, kind of tired. So congratulations, LEV Project, 100 installments. And we're going to go all the way to the end of the year. So let's do this. Let's not waste no time today. And all right. I'll start by saying thank you all who have supported and continue to support what it is that we're doing here. And yeah, this installment is Olaudah. If I'm saying his name wrong, Olaudah Equiano. I keep calling him Olaudah Equiano. The life of Olaudah Equiano, or Gustavus Vassa, the African. Okay, you could get this. What did I get this book for? Like $4. It's not that much if you want to get the book, and if you're like me, you like marketing your book, taking highlights. So here we go. I have not read this one, so again, you're going to probably experience it as I am experiencing it. Some people like go, oh, why don't you just read straight through it? Well, I say this is for healing, not for entertainment. And so if we're all allowed our expression. And so yeah, you can definitely type in the box and share. So here we go. Hold on one second. Let me pull you guys up to, oh. I noticed that we complain if we do and we complain if we don't. We're people. Humanity just wants everything and nothing at the same time, if that is understandable. So excited to watch you live for the first time. Hey, Keisha, what's up? How you doing? Yep. Welcome back. Yes, we are live. But I'm not going to be on camera all the time because I feel a little tired. You're like, why is it? I feel a little tired. So, yeah, but definitely if you have any questions or comments to share while we're going through it, if you're like, hold up, I'm going to stop right there. Let's go back and revisit that. We could do that too. So welcome, Keisha. Let's get this in. An unusual time, but, we're going to get this in. So I'm going to read the note. The note says, I have no hesitation in saying that 3/4 of the slaves sent abroad from Africa are the fruit of wars fomented by the variants of our own race. Oh boy, we're going to start problems here. First line, eh? We stimulate the Negro's passion by the introduction of wants and fancies never dreamed of by the simple native, while slavery in Africa was an institution of domestic need and custom alone. But what was once a luxury has now ripened into an absolute necessity, so that man in truth has become the coin of Africa. Captain Theodore Cannot. So we're going to have to get this book, Adventures of an African Slaver. So we're going to have to get that book because that might be our next read. Let me read that again. I have no hesitation in saying that 3/4 of slaves went abroad from Africa are the fruit of wars fomented by the every avarice of our own race, meaning the European. We stimulated the Negro's passion by the introduction of wants and fancies never dreamed of by the simple native. While slavery in Africa was an institution of domestic need and custom alone, but what was once a luxury has now ripened into an absolute necessity, so that man is in truth has become the coin of Africa. We ain't even get started yet. This drink about to be juicy. Okay. 100, yes, sister, 100. Congratulations. And congratulations to all of us. This is the 100th episode of the LEV Project installment. Congratulations to all of us as we continue on this healing journey. So we're going to begin. One victim of evil, compellingly described above, was Olaudah Equiano, 1745 to 1797. Also known as Gustavus Vassa, an Igbo from northeastern Nigeria, West Africa, kidnapped at 11 and sold into slavery. He experienced the tortures often associated with the horrendous Middle Passage while being shipped to Barbados by British slavers. Traditionally, the slave ships sent out first from a home port bound for the Atlantic coast of Africa. After exchanging their cargo of various goods for slaves, they departed Africa from the West Indies or another destination on the American continents. The so-called Middle Passage or second leg of the voyage were where the human cargo was stored up on board in the most inhumane conditions imaginable. Finally, the ships would head homeward laden with products from the American plantations. Molasses was one of the most highly valued of the commodities obtained from the slave trade, since it was used to make rum, which in turn served a currency to buy more slaves for the next voyage. British slavers later brought Olaudah Equiano to Virginia, where he was sold to British naval officer. Traveling widely with his master, he became a worthy seaman in his own right, participating in a major naval battles during the French and Indian Wars, as well as in the search for the Northwest Passage led by Philip's expedition of 1772 to 1773. And finally, after more than a decade of enslavement, Equiano earned enough money to buy his freedom and settled in England. There he became a central figure in the British abolitionist movement, initiated by the Quakers who stand against the slave trade dated back to 1671. And we read that. What's the name of the man? His name is something another Fox. Something another Fox. He wrote a letter to the Friends. If anybody remembers the name of that Quaker, George Fox or something of that. So many names in my head. But yes, that's on record of him warning the Europeans that what you're doing is going to backfire. It's a very dangerous thing. I think his name is George Fox. Something another Fox. Anyway, it says, there it goes. See, I know I wasn't bugging out. Oh, Mooney, your mind is coming back. They became a central figure in the British abolitionist movement initiated by the Quakers, who stand against the slave trade dated back to 1671. There it goes. When their founder, George Fox, see, I know I wasn't bugging out, expressed strong anti-slavery sentiments. In addition to Equiano's role as forceful lecturer intent upon exposing the barbarism and cruelties of slavery, he was appointed in 1786 to serve as commissionary for the ship that was to carry over 500 of London's freed slaves, established a settlement in Freetown, Sierra Leone, at the time a British colony of the west coast of Africa. A voyage laudable in intentions, but a failure in the event. Olaudah Equiano's most valuable and enduring achievement, however, is contained in the present volume, his autobiography, written and published in London in 1789, when he was 44 years old in his own time. The work was the bestseller and published in 9 different editions, including American edition, German, Dutch, 1790 to 1791. Eventually, by 1837, 9 more editions were published. It remained in print well into the mid-19th century and helped spur the American abolitionist movement. In our own time, the book is regarded by scholars as the prototypical slave narrative, one of a handful of documents which formed the genesis of Black literary tradition. It is also regarded as an outgrowth of the genre of spiritual autobiography, generally marked by these three phases: the life of sin, conversion, and rebirth, exhibiting the classic three-part structure of slave narrative literature: slavery, escape, freedom. Equiano's story is unique in its inclusion of vivid descriptions of African culture and society before the wrenching onslaught of the white man and the slave trade. At the same time, Equiano does not blind himself to the corruption of those of his countrymen who were lured by the promises of riches for the trafficking of slaves. It is important to emphasize here, underscoring that, what has already been expressed in the opening quote above. The slavery in Africa before the advent of the slave trade was altogether more benign than its now non-native form. In fact, among certain ethnic groups in African society, there is no distinction between the words prisoner and slave, a fact that goes far into articulating the sheer punitive value embodied by slavery in Africa, where it was an integral part of the economic and justice systems. Slaves are often prisoners of war or individuals who had committed crimes like adultery. By consistent good conduct in the master's households, they could rise through the ranks to become leaders or marry their master's daughters. In total opposition to this native form of slavery was the white man's complete subjugation and isolation of the African slave on the basis of race alone. In conclusion, the life of Olaudah Equiano, or Gustavus Vassa, the African, is a stunning testament to the power of the human spirit to transcend seemingly insurmountable obstacles in the struggle for survival and the quest for freedom. That is the opening note on the book for those who have just joined us. We are in our 100th episode, and so we are going to do what we said we was going to do. We're going to read a new narrative. All right. It opens by saying, this is now his words. It opens by saying, behold, it says, God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. For the Lord is my strength and my song. He also is become my salvation. And in that day shall ye praise the Most High. I keep saying, Lord. Call upon his name, declare his doings among the people. And he quotes Isaiah 22, 2 through 4. All right. The book is dedicated. He dedicates the book. He said, to the Lord, spiritual and temporal, in the commons of the Parliament of Great Britain. He says, my lords and gentlemen, that just means, rulers. Permit me with the greatest deference and respect to lay at your feet the following genuine narrative, the chief design of which is to excite in your august assemblies a sense of compassion for the miseries which the slave trade hath entailed on my unfortunate countrymen. By the horrors of the slave trade was I first torn away from all the tender connections that were naturally dear to my heart. But these, through the mysterious ways of providence, I ought to regard as infinitely more than compensated by the introduction I have thence obtained to the knowledge of the Christian religion, and of a nation which by its liberal sentiments, its humanity, the glorious freedom of its government, and its proficiency in arts and sciences has exalted the dignity of human nature. I am sensible I ought to entreat your pardon for addressing to you a work so wholly devoid of literary merit, but as the production of an unlettered African who is actuated by the hope of becoming an instrument towards the relief of his suffering countrymen. I trust that such a man pleading in such a case will be acquitted of boldness and presumption. So basically, he apologized and don't know why, but anyway. May the God of heaven inspire your hearts with peculiar benevolence on the important day when the question of abolition is to be discussed, when thousands, in consequence of your determination, are to look forward for happiness or misery. And then he signs it, most obedient and devoted humble servant, Olaudah Equiano, or Gustavus Vassa. All right, now, I like to read all of the stuff before we get into the meat and potatoes. It gives you a context of why the story is written, who the story is written to, so we can understand. And he says his goal, this was during the fight for abolition of slavery. So many narratives came to the forefront during that time because many people weren't aware of all the things that were going on. So many narratives surfaced during that time and were used for the very same purpose. So the preface, When this, quote, interesting narrative, end quote, was given to the world, some of the most public-spirited gentlemen, eminent philanthropists in Great Britain had begun to exert themselves and to interest the public in favor of degraded sons of Africa. The subscription list of the first edition could boast, but it was graced with the names of greater number of worthy characters than had been adorned the pages of any small book published in this country. Their Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, the Dukes of York and Cumberland, the Dukes of Marlborough, Bedford, Northumberland, etc., the Earls of Aylesbury, Dartmouth, Stanhope, the Duchess of, Buccleuch, Lady Anne Erskine, the Countess of Huntington, Miss Hannah More, Miss J. Bailey, Samuel Whitbread, the Honorable William Wyndham, George Rose, and I guess again he's saying these are all people of their day, Yowitt, Kippis, Peckard, Adam Clark, etc., the Reverend Clarkson, Rowland Hill, John Wesley, Miles Atkinson, Sir Sidney Smith, Sir Richard Hill, Dr. Hay Granville Sharp, Esquire, Lindley Murray, Esquire, Pym Nevis, Esquire, William Tuck, Esquire, are a small part of the bright constellations. So I guess he just did a roll call of worthiness who patronized the author and this his production. The notice of such men confers honor on a humble individual and their approbation in the highest praise. His round, unvarnished tale was of great service in the noble cause which had been undertaken, being a true relation of occurrences which had taken place and of sufferings which had endured. In its produced a degree of human feeling in men's minds to excite, which the most animated addresses and the most convincing abstract reasoning would have labored in vain. Some judgment may be formed of the popularity of this narrative and of the ability with it was written from the circumstance of its having raised the indignation and engendered the hatred of many persons interested in the prosperity of the slave trade. In various ways, the author was persecuted. They tried to asper his character by representing him as an impostor and and invalidate his testimony by accusing him of willful falsehoods. They carried the violence of their passions to such a height as to assert he was not a native African, wow, but that he was born in Danish island of Santa Cruz in the West Indies. His dismal by government from the situation of commissary to the black poor going to Africa furnished these inveterate adversaries with another opportunity of pouring contumely on an innocent man and insatiating crimes against him of which he was never guilty. Insinuating crimes against him of which he was never guilty. But they also character assassination, that's a tool that's always used. But they failed in this as in their former attacks, for it appeared in explanation that the only circumstances which bore the color of charge against him in this affair was his determination not silently to sit and connive at the frauds which were committed by others. Whenever he defended himself, facts were the foundation of his assertions, and no statement was made by him for which he had not some voucher or authority. He appealed to these and to persons that had known him in early life, and the envious shafts of his opposers fell pointless. If his enemies possessed arrogance and industry, his favors in righteous cause were courageous and indefeatable. They traced several injurious reports in their polluted sources and compelled the editor of one paper in which his character had been traduced to make a suitable apology for his conduct, though he was not himself the author of the offensive paragraph. The editor of another paper in which the same calumny was copied, in making his apology says, after examining the paragraph which immediately follows the one in question, I am inclined to believe that one respecting Gustavus Vassa may have been fabricated by some of the advocates for continuing the slave trade for the purposes of weakening the forces of the evidence brought against that trade. For I believe if they could, they would stifle the evidence altogether. So this is interesting to hear the fight that he was getting to release this information. An objection, but a very unreasonable one, has been raised against the author for the account which he gives of his native country, his own notable extraction, and the manners, custom, and religion of his countrymen. To many people, it has seemed too circumstantial to be recollected by a youth who was but 11 years of age when he was forced to visit foreign lands. But whoever will give himself the trouble of reflecting on what passed during his infancy in the neighborhood which he had not since visited will believe that if questioned on the custom of the villages, he could give a very accurate detail of their sports and uses. Shai, can you pass mommy some water, please? Thank you. Had he moreover been torn from a land of birth as early of a period of Gustavus was, he will readily conceive that the people among whom he sojourned would soon hear from him a succinct account of his extraction, and that he would not be backward at informing them of being the son of an esquire. On this account, he would naturally think himself entitled to greater commiseration than would be claimed by a youth whose father had been a poor chimney sweeper. There is a mournful pleasure enjoyed by unwilling exiles, and frequently stirred up, quote, busy meddling memory. Wow, they call it busy meddling memory, and dwelling with rapture on those scenes and events which were enchanted in childhood and youth. Such images are most pleasing that can be afforded to them by reflection on the past. And the greatest wonder is that there is not more of this ecstatic feeling discovered in the following narrative. But the Calvinism of the author has also excited the spleen of some people. At late editor of this work has been pleased to say in his preface to it that it is true that here there's a tincture of superstition seems to have spread over the author's mind, but this appears to be a natural effect of false idea of Christianity, and the great author of which had taken possession of his mind. In common with many in other respects enlightened Europeans, he seems to consider the benevolent author of our existence as an arbitrary tyrant of partial parent, dooming by an arbitrary eternal decree some of his creatures to a state of impossibility. Thank you. Where am I? Impossibility of obtaining his favor or their own future happiness, while at the same time others are as arbitrarily elected to be distinguished for favorites. The rational and thinking of our race, when they discover the graceful to man in the narrative before us, will do well to remember that it is the production of the, quote, untortured mind, end quote, of an African. Candor will suggest to them that he might have formed his notions of the Christian God from the conduct of those who unworthily take up the Christian name. Nurtured at the icy bosom of slavery, accustomed to the whip and the rack, why should it appear strange that he should coincide in the opinion with the freeborn Briton, who while he possesses the light of philosophy and revelation, yet views the God of nature as unfeeling despot and cruel taskmaster. But reason blushes at such a charge, and true piety droops her head at the supposition. This is exceedingly illiberal. Okay. Every man has a right to form his religious opinions according to the oracles of truth. And if he imitate Gustavus in searching the scriptures and embracing the way which he thinks they point out as the most excellent, he will act properly and will not wander far astray. For those who have just joined us, I'm reading the preface right now. I know some people be like, just get to the story, but I'm reading the preface of Olaudah Equiano's book. We almost finished the preface. The book is in the link in the box. Hold on, let me do this thing right here so we can keep hearing this noise here. It goes on by saying, Professors of religion are greatly influenced in their views of doctrines of the gospel by the views of those among whom they have been educated. The peculiar doctrines of their system are constantly inculcated on them, growing with their growth and strengthening with their strength. The same observations apply particularly to those who, like subjects of this narrative, know little of their natural state and less of God, their creator and redeemer, till they are advanced in years. It seems natural that such persons should be gratefully attached to the congregation of believers among whom they found rest to their souls, and should esteem that company of people, whoever despised by others as the excellent of the earth, and their doctrines and discipline are salutary and scriptural. On this subject of monthly reviewers, who were never yet suspected of religious enthusiasm, have said, quote, or not quote, they got it italicized. We entertain no doubt of general authenticity of this intelligent African story, though it is not improbable that some English writer has assisted him in the compliment or at least the correction of his book. For it is sufficiently well, oh, we think somebody helped him because it's well written, so it couldn't have been him, right? The narrative wears an honest face, and we have conceived a good opinion of the man from the artless manner in which he has detailed the variety of adventures and vicissitudes which have fallen to his lot. His publication appears very seasonably at a time when Negro slavery is the subject of public investigation, and it seems calculated to increase the odium that has been excited against the West Indian planter, or the West Indian planters, on account of the cruelties that some are said to have exercised on their slaves, many instances of which are here detailed. The sable author of this volume appears to be a very sensible man, and he is surely not the less worthy of credit from being a convert to Christianity. He is a Methodist, they just call him a Calvinist, now he's a Methodist, and has filled many pages towards the end of his work with accounts of his dream visions and divine influences. But all this, supposing him to have been under a delusive influence, yo, Europeans are funny, only serves to convince us that he is guided by principle, and that he is not one of these poor converts who, having undergone the ceremony of baptism, have remained content with that portion only of Christian religion, instances of which are said to be almost innumerable in America and the West Indies. It goes on to say, Gustavus Vassa appears a very different character, and therefore we heartily wish success to his publication, which we are glad to see has been encouraged by a very respectable subscription. Oh, we give him the approval. We give you the approval to tell your story, right? The writer of this preface has not been able to collect any particulars concerning Gustavus Vassa beyond what he gives of himself in the following narrative, except that he died a few years ago at some place in the south of England. How highly gratified would this good man have been had he lived to pursue the bill of the abolition of slavery, of the slave trade. To the accomplishment of this desirable object, obstacles almost innumerable were opposed when this narrative was first published. Yet the author of it formed great hopes that the cause of the oppressed would prevail. So he didn't even get to see, it, but he planted a seed that his words were translated in over 9 different languages, and it was one of the driving forces. So, live your life to the fullest. You never know. Your eyes may not see, but you may plant seeds that will help to liberate future generations. It says, to the accomplishment of this desirable object, obstacles almost innumerable were opposed when this narrative was first published. Yet the author of it formed great hopes that the cause of the oppressed would prevail, and so it has proved. Every difficulty has been surmounted by the activity, firmness, and perseverance of real friends of God's universal family. The men who were at the time ministers of state threw all their influence into the scale of humanity and justice. Their short-lived administration did not allow them time for attempting much. Yet had they no other achievements of which to boast, this deed of mercy will, in retirement, afford them a divine satisfaction, and their names will be venerated as long as religion, virtue, and legitimate freedom are esteemed by men, when the greatest glory of the warrior and the political sagacity of the statesman are forgotten, no longer exciting interest in others or yielding delight to themselves, this durable monument of, they keep saying, godlike benevolence of the oppressed children of Africa will remain, to give the most refined pleasure to those who raised it. This one of the glories peculiar to England will, it is hoped, never suffer from the negligence of those who are at its appointed guardians. May other European nations be induced by the excellence and success of our example, here you know, to erect similar trophies of humanity and true greatness, and may universal kindness find asylum in every beast and all men owning its pleasing sway. So this was the preface written by Leeds, the 25th of August, 1814. And so we are going to get into the first chapter here. Now it gives us a context of what he went through and the importance of doing his work. Sometimes we get so concerned, oh, this is not going to happen. This is not going to happen. This is not going to happen. We don't know, blah, 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 blah. But you don't know, you may not see it, but you don't know how much your work may influence something else. So do your work, do the work, leave everything else up to the creator. But if you have a work to do, do it. So let's go ahead and read. Sometimes we waiting for everybody else to jump on the bus when you get on the bus, but not necessarily so. All right, boom. We're going to bust out chapter 1 now. Chapter 1. Woo. The author's account of his country, the manners and customs of the inhabitants, administration of justice, embrenche, marriage ceremony, public entertainment, mode of living, dress, manufactures, building, commerce, agriculture, war and religion, superstition of the natives, funeral ceremonies of the priests or magicians, curious mode of discovering poison, some hints concerning the origin of author's countrymen. What happened? No, drink some water. Hold on 1 second, because as you know, the children, they just wait till I'm doing something so that they can start making moves. All right. Chapter 1. I believe it is difficult for those who publish their own memoirs to escape the imputation of vanity. Nor is this the only disadvantage under which they labor. It is also their misfortune that whatever is uncommon is rarely, if ever, believed. And from what is obvious, we are apt to turn with disgust and to charge the writer of it with impertinence. People generally think those memoirs only worthy to be read or remembered which abound in great or striking events. Those, in short, which in a high degree excite either admiration or pity, or others they consign to contempt and oblivion. It is, therefore, I confess, not a little hazardous in a private and obscure individual, and a stranger too, thus to solicit the indulgent attention of the public, especially when I offer here the history of neither a saint, a hero, nor a tyrant. I believe there are very few events in my life which have not happened to many. It is the true incidents of it are numerous. And did I consider myself a European, I might say my sufferings were great. But when I compare my lot with that of most of my countrymen, I regard myself as particular favorite of heaven, and acknowledge the mercies of providence in every occurrence in my life. If then the following narrative does not appear sufficiently interesting to engage general attention, let my motive be some excuse for its publication. I am not so foolishly vain as to expect from it either immortality or literary reputation. And that's exactly, he got it, because it's still being talked about today. If it affords any satisfaction to my numerous friends, at whose request it has been written, or in the smallest degree promotes the interest of humanity, the ends from which it was undertaken will be fully attained, and every wish of my heart gratified. Let it therefore be remembered that in wishing to avoid censure, I do not aspire to praise. That was his opening on chapter 1. Now we are on chapter 2. The part of Africa known by the name of Guinea, to which the trade of slaves is carried on, extends along the coast about 3,400 miles from Senegal to Angola, and includes a variety of kingdoms. Of these, the most considerable is the kingdom of Benin, both as to the extent and wealth, the riches or richness and culture of the soil, the power of its king, and the number and warlike disposition of its inhabitants. It is situated nearly under the line and extends along the coast about 170 miles, but runs back into the interior of Africa to a distance hereto, I believe, unexplored by any traveler, and seems only terminated at length by the empire of Abyssinia, which would be ancient Ethiopia, near 1,500 miles from its beginning. So that's why he's saying Benin is so big that interior. This kingdom is divided into many provinces or districts, in one of the most remote and fertile of which, named Esaka, situated in fruitful vale. I was born 17. The distance of this province from the capital of Benin and the seacoast must be very considerable, for I had never heard of white men or Europeans, nor of the sea, and or subjugation to the king of Benin was little more than nominal. Every transaction of the government, as far as my slender observation extended, was conducted by the chiefs or elders of the place. The manners and government of a people who have little commerce with other countries are generally very simple, and the history of what passes in one family or village may serve as a specimen of the whole nation. My father was one of those elders or chiefs of whom I have spoken, and was styled Mbrenche, a term, as I remember, importing the highest distinction and signifying in our language a mark of grandeur. This mark is conferred on the person entitled to it by cutting the skin across at the top of the forehead and drawing it down to the eyebrow and applying a warm hand to it while in this situation and rubbing it until it shrieks up into a thick wale across the lower part of the forehead. So he's talking about tribal marks. Most of the judges and senators were thus marked. My father had long borne this badge. I had seen it conferred on one of my brothers, and I also was destined to receive it by my parents. Those in Brenche, or chief men, decided disputes. They were judges, basically, like you see in the Torah, and punished crimes, for which purpose they are always assembled together. The proceedings were generally short, and in most cases, the law of retaliation prevailed. I remember a man was brought before my father and the other judges for kidnapping a boy, and although he was the son of a chief or senator, he was condemned to make response by a man or woman slave. Adultery, however, was sometimes punished by slavery or death, a punishment which I believe is inflicted on it throughout most of the nations of Africa. So, sacred among them is the honor of the marriage bed, and so jealous are they of fidelity of their wives. Of this I recollect an instance. A woman was convicted before the judges of adultery and delivered over, as the customs were, to her husband to be punished. Accordingly, he determined to put her to death, but it being found just before the execution that she had an infant at her breast, and no woman being prevailing on to perform the part of nurse, she was spared on account of the child. The men, however, do not preserve the same constancy to their wives, which they expect from them for the indulgent. So they indulge in a plural, though seldom in more than twos. Their mode of marriage is this. Both parties are usually betrothed when young by their parents, though I have known the males betrothed themselves. On this occasion, a feast is prepared, and the bride and bridegroom stand up in the midst of their friends, who are assembled for the purpose. While he declares she is henceforth to be looked upon as his wife, and that no person is to pay any addresses to her. This is also immediately proclaimed in the vicinity on which the bride retires from the assembly, sometime after she is brought home to her husband, and then another feast is made, to which the relations of both parties are invited. Let me get my thing, because in our community, we seem to think that, So he's speaking of the engagement process, the declaration process, and how it goes. Let me go ahead and outline this. It says, sometimes after she is brought home to her husband, then another feast is made, to which the relations of both parties are invited. Her parents then deliver her the bridegroom, accompanied with a number of blessings, and at the same time they tie around her waist a cotton string of the thickness of a goose quill, which none but married women are permitted to wear. She is now considered as completely his wife, and at this time the dowry is given to the new married pair, which generally constitutes a portion of the land, slaves, cattle, household goods, and implements of husbandry. These are offered by the friends of both parties, besides which the parents of the bridegroom presents gifts to those of the bride. That's the bride price, whose property she is looked upon before marriage, but after it she is esteemed the sole property of the husband. The ceremony being now ended, the festival begins, which celebrates with bonfires, loud acclamations of joy, accompanied with music and dancing. For those who think there are no ceremonies, there are no right ways to do it, oh, it's European, it's Christianity. No, we just have a destroyed mind and have stepped far away from certain rites of passage. Hey, son of Larry Peace, how you doing? Right now we're reading Olaudah Equiano. We on to chapter 3. He just went over the ceremonies of marriage in this, where he came from. Anybody remember where we just read he came from? What country was he from? Shy, take her. Anybody remember? Are we paying attention? Where's he from? I'll leave that out there. I'll continue. We are almost a nation of dancers, musicians, and poets. Every great event, such as a triumphant return from battle, or other cause of public rejoicing, is celebrated in public dances, which are accompanied with songs and music suited to the occasion. Hold on for me 1 second. All right. The assembly is separated into 4 divisions, which dance either apart or in succession, and each with a character peculiar to itself. The first division contains the married men, who in their dances frequently exhibit feats of arms and representation of battle. To these succeed the married women, who dance in the second division. The young men occupy the third, and the maidens the fourth. Each represents some interesting scene of a real life, such as a great achievement, domestic employment, a pathetic story, or some rural sport. And as the subject is generally founded on some recent event, it is therefore ever new. This gives our dance a spirit and variety which I have scarcely seen elsewhere. We have many musical instruments, particularly drums of different kinds, a piece of music which resembles a guitar, and another much like a staccato. These last are chiefly used by the betrothed virgins, who play on them on all grand festivals. As our manners are simple, our luxuries are few. The dress of both sexes is nearly the same. It generally consists of a long piece of calico or muslin wrapped loosely around the body, somewhat in the form of a Highland plaid. This is usually dyed blue, which is our favorite color. It is extracted from a berry and is brighter and richer than any I have seen in Europe. Besides this, our women distinction with golden ornaments, which they dispose with some profusion on their arms and legs. When our women are not employed with the men in tillage, their usual occupation is spinning and weaving cotton, which they afterwards dye and make into garments. They also manufacture earthen vessels, of which we have many kinds, among the rest, tobacco pipes made after the same fashion and used in the same manner as those in Turkey. Our manner of living is entirely plain, a simple life, like everybody's talking about live off the grid. For as yet, the natives are unacquainted with those refined in cookery, which debauch the taste. Bullocks, goats, poultry supply the greatest part of their food. These constitute likewise the principal wealth of the country and the chief articles of its commerce. The flesh is usually stewed in a pan to make it savory. We sometimes use also pepper and other spices. We have salt made of wood ashes. Our vegetables are mostly plantains, lettuce, yams, bean, and Indian corn. The head of the family usually eats alone. His wives and slaves have also their separate table. Before we taste food, we always wash our hands. Indeed, our cleanliness on all occasions is extreme. But on this, it is an indispensable ceremony. After washing, libation is made by pouring out a small portion of the drink on the floor and by tossing a small quantity of food in a certain place for the spirits of departed relations, which the natives supposed to preside over their conduct and to guard them from evil. So they're giving food to the dead. Okay. They are totally unacquainted with a strong or spirituous liquors, and their principal beverage is palm wine. This is got from a tree of that name by tapping it at the top and fastening a large gourd to it, and sometimes one tree will yield 3 or 4 gallons in a night. When just drawn, it is of delicious sweetness, but in a few days it acquires a spirituous flavor, though I never saw anyone intoxicated by it. The same tree also produces nuts and oil. And let me tell you guys, palm oil, if you've never tried palm oil, that's some good stuff. It's a very red oil. It can be bought in your health food stores or online. And it has more beta carotene than that's just a side note, more beta carotene than carrots. So I think it's the highest that you can get. Vitamin A is ridiculous. So if you have not tried palm oil, it's the real deal. But I'll continue. Our principal luxury is in perfumes. One sort of these is an odoriferous wood of delicious fragrance. The other a kind of earth, a small portion of which is thrown into fire, diffuses a powerful odor. We beat this wood into powder and mix it with palm oil, with which both men and women perfume themselves. So that was the ending of the reading of chapter 3. He's giving us a look into the culture of his community of which he lived. Let's continue, chapter 4. In our buildings, we study convenience rather than ornament. Each master of a family has a large square piece of ground surrounded with a moat of fence or enclosed with a wall made of red earth tempered, which when dry is hard as a brick. Within this are his houses to accommodate his family and slaves. So again, you notice he keeps saying that slaves were a part of the culture. Bond servants, which is, if new, not saying wrong or right, I'm just saying it wasn't a brand new concept, which if numerous frequently cause these tenements to present the appearance of a village. In the middle stands the principal building appropriated to the sole use of the master and consisting of 2 apartments in which he sits in the day with his family. The other is left apart for the reception of his friends. He has besides these a distinct apartment in which he sleeps together with his male children. On each side are apartments of his wives, who have also their separate day and night houses. The habitations of slaves and their families are distributed throughout the rest of the enclosure. These houses never exceed 1 story in height. They're always built of wood or stakes driven in the ground, crossed with wattles, and neatly plastered within and without. The roof is thatched with reeds, or day houses are left open at the sides, but those in which we sleep are always covered, plastered in the inside with a composition mixed with cow dung to keep off different insects. which annoy us during the night. The walls and floors also of these are generally covered with mats. Our beds consist of a platform raised 3 or 4 feet from the ground, of which are laid skins and different parts of a spongy tree called plantain. Our covering is calico or muslin, the same as our dress. The usual seats are few logs of wood, but we have benches, which are generally perfumed to accommodate strangers. These compose the greater part of our household furniture. Houses so constructed and furnished require but little skill to erect them. Every man is sufficient architect for the purpose. The whole neighborhood afford their unanimous assistance in building them, and in return receive and expect no other recompense than a feast. So everybody, like Habitat for Humanity, everybody chips in. But you also have to keep notice, for those who just joined us, you have to understand the perspective from which he's speaking. He started off by saying he's a chief man. He comes from the family of chief men. And so that is the perspective from which he is oftentimes explaining what it is that he's used to. Because again, like he's saying, slaves would definitely have a different home if you're a bond person. And in these situations, you weren't necessarily a slave because you were black, because everybody was melanated. You wasn't a slave for your whole life. You know, sometimes people are indentured for whatever the term of service is, like a kind of like a contract, so to say. People go to the NBA, they got contracts. NFL, they have contracts for how many years. But in these situations, you know, you weren't paid millions of dollars. As we live in a country where nature is prodigal of her favors, our wants are few and easily supplied. Of course, we have few manufacturers. They consist for the most part of calicos, earthenwares, ornaments, and instruments of war and husbandry. But these make no part of our commerce. The principal articles of which, as I have observed, are provisions. In such a state, money is of little use. However, we have some small pieces of coin, if I may call them such. They are made something like an anchor, but I do not remember either their value or denomination. We have also markets, at which I have been frequently with my mother. They are sometimes visited by stout mahogany colored men from the southwest of us. We call them Oye Ibo or Ibo, which term signifies red men living at a distance, Oye Ibo. And that term came across to the Caribbean. Red Ibo. So red men, meaning they're of a lighter complexion, still melanated, but a lighter complexion. They generally bring us firearms, gunpowder, hats, beads, and dried fish. The last we esteemed a great, so they were trading with somebody, bringing them firearms, gunpowder, hats, beads, and dried fish. They generally bring us, the last we esteemed a great rarity, as our waters were only brooks and springs. These articles they barter with us for odoriferous wood. And I don't know why I keep thinking myrrh when he keeps saying odoriferous wood. Maybe it's myrrh or something that's related that has a good smell to it. And earth and our salt of wood ashes. They also carry slaves through our land. So they would have been exposed way before people started getting yanked up. But the strictest account is exacted of their manner of procuring them before they are suffered to pass. Sometimes indeed we sold slaves to them. Sometimes indeed we sold slaves to them. Let me read that one more time. Sometimes indeed we, Olaudah Equiano is saying, his community, sold slaves to these Oye Ibo, but they were only prisoners of war, or such among us as had been convicted of kidnapping, adultery, and some other crimes which we esteem heinous. Okay. Go ahead and outline this, as we've said this before, but here's another source. This practice of kidnapping induced me to think that notwithstanding all our strictness, their principal business among us was to trepan our people. I remember too, they carried great sacks along with them, which not long after I had an opportunity of fatally seeing applied to the infamous purpose, Sorry, let me read that again. He says, I remember too, they carried great sacks along with them, which not long after I had an opportunity of fatally seeing applied to that infamous purpose. I may think he's talking about stealing people. These chapters are not that long, so we're gonna breeze through another about 2 more. We're on chapter 5. If anybody have any questions or comments, feel free to share at this time. Nigeria, but he called it Guinea. So can you find some of what his community did in Torah? I started reading this a while back, but didn't finish. Yeah, we're reading along here. Son of Levi, he said, and yeah, he said he was from. He described Benin, but he said he's from Guinea, right? Hold on 1 second. 1 second. 1 second. Thank you. Come on. All right. Sorry about that. Had to get the baby. So, yeah. So we're up to, yeah, we're going to keep reading and see if we could pick up along the way some of the things we've heard, some of the things we probably said, and where it's coming from. Because, again, like I told another sister, I was on a show the other day, Sister Renee, and I said, you know, when we begin to generalize the experience of our foreparents, we do this kind of the same thing that the European does. You know, it all looks alike. It doesn't. It doesn't all look alike. All slavery wasn't the same. There are many similarities, but in these readings, we get to give voice and let our foreparents, those who came before us, tell their own story. You know, instead of us just throwing it all together in one bag and saying that's that. So we're gonna continue here on chapter 5. He made them in nice little concise chapters here. So I'm gonna continue here. It says, chapter 5, our land is uncommon. Hold on 1 second. All right. He goes on in chapter 5. For those who've just joined us, we're reading the life of Olaudah Equiano. Right now, he's telling us about what he remembered as a child, about his growing up as a chiefman's son in Guinea. Our land is uncommonly rich and fruitful and produces all kinds of vegetables in great abundance. We have plenty of Indian corn, vast quantities of cotton and tobacco. Pineapples grow without culture. They are about the size of the largest sugar loaf and finely flavored. I'm not going to front. The pineapples over here is nothing like the pineapples I tasted on the continent. They were not like what you see, the little dough-looking pineapple. The top is not so straight. If some would say it's like a little kinky. The top of the pineapple is very kinky. It's smaller and it's sweet. It is very sweet, I must say. It's a different variety. I don't know, but definitely the pineapple is good. But it says, we have also spices of different kinds, particularly pepper, and a variety of delicious fruits, which I have never seen in Europe, together with gums of various kinds and honey in abundance. All our industry is exerted to improve those blessings of nature. Agriculture is our chief employment, and everyone, even children and women, is engaged in it. Thus, we are habituated to labor from our earliest years. Everyone contributes something to the common stock, and we are unacquainted with idleness. We have no beggars. The benefits of such a mode of living are obvious. The West India planter prefers the slaves of Benin or Igbo to those of the part of Guinea for their hardiness and intelligence, integrity, and zeal. Those benefits are felt by us in general healthiness of the people, in their vigor and activity. I might have added too, to their comeliness. Deformity is unknown amongst us. I mean that of shape. Numbers of natives of Igbo now in London might be brought in support of this assertion, for in regard to complexion, ideas of beauty are wholly relative. I remember while in Africa to have seen 3 Negro children who were tawny and another quite white, who were universally regarded as deformed by myself and the natives in general, as far as related to their complexions. Our women too were in my eyes at least uncommonly graceful, alert, and modest to a degree of bashfulness. Nor do I remember to have ever heard of an instance of incontinence among them before marriage. They are also remarkably cheerful. Indeed, cheerfulness and affability are 2 of the leading characteristics of our nation. Do you notice that he's talking about melanated people, but he's comparing himself and his nation to other nations of melanated people? Like, he didn't think, I say this all the time, he didn't think they were all one. He said, and he's actually going to say that European planters prefer slaves of Benin or Igbo to those to parts of Guinea for their different qualities. And we read this before, that planters will get different quality, different people, they will get slaves from different regions for different jobs. And so this is what he's also attesting to. So I say that to say, when we say, why can't we all be together? This is a man who was born in 1740, 46, I think. And he didn't think everybody was all together. So, I'm just saying, 1745. All right, let me continue. Our tillage is exercised in a large plain of common, some hours walk from our dwellings, and all the neighbors resort thither in a body. They use no beast of husbandry, and their only instruments are hoes, axe, shovels, beaks, or pointed iron to dig with. I'm drinking water. Sometimes we are visited by locusts, which come in large clouds so as to darken the air and destroy our harvest. This, however, happens rarely, but when it does, a famine is produced by it. I remember an instance or 2 of this happening. This common is often the theater of war, and therefore when our people go out to till their land, they not only go in a body, but generally take their arms with them for fear of surprise. And when they apprehend an invasion, they guard the avenues to their dwellings by striking sticks into the ground, which are so sharp at the end as to pierce the foot and are generally dipped in poison. From what I can recollect of these battles, they appear to have been eruptions of one little state or district into another to obtain prisoners or booty. Again, booty, spoils of war. Perhaps they were incited to this by those traders who brought amongst us the European goods which I mentioned. Such a mode of obtaining slaves in Africa is common, and I believe more are procured in this way by kidnapping than in any other. When a trader wants slaves, he applies to a chief for them. When a trader wants slaves, he applies to a chief for them. When a trader wants slaves, he applies to a chief for them and tempts him with his wares. And tempts him. That's what the European slave trader said in the opening of this quote by Captain Theobald Cannet, Adventures of an African Slaver. It is not extraordinary if one of these occasions he yields to the temptation with a little firmness and accepts the price of his fellow creature's liberty with as little reluctance as the enlightened merchant. Accordingly, he falls on his neighbors, and a desperate battle ensues. If he prevails and takes prisoners, he gratifies his avarice by selling them. But if his party be vanquished and he falls into the hands of the enemy, he's put to death. For as he has been known to foment their quarrels, it is thought dangerous to let him survive, and no ransom can save him, although all other prisoners may be redeemed. We have firearms, bows and arrows broad, 2-edged swords, javelins, also shields, which will cover a man from head to foot. All are taught the use of these weapons. Even our women are warriors and march boldly out to fight along with the men. This is for a little study I got going on here. Please excuse me. Mark this. Our whole district is a kind of militia on a certain signal given, such as the firing of a gun at night. They all rise in arms and rush up upon their enemy. It is perhaps sometimes remarkable that when our people march to field, a red flag or banner is borne before them. I was once a witness to a battle on our common. We had all been at work in it one day, as usual, when our people were suddenly attacked. I climbed a tree at some distance from which I beheld the fight. There were many women as well as men on both sides. Among others, my mother was armed with the enemy's chief prisoner. He was carried off in great triumph, and though he offered a large ransom for his life, he was put to death. A virgin of note among our enemies had been slain in the battle, and her arm was exposed in our marketplace, where our trophies were also exhibited. Europeans were known for keeping pieces of people who they may have lynched or murdered. So this is looking like a human issue right here, where our trophies were also exhibited. The spoils were divided according to the merit of the warriors. Those prisoners which were not sold or redeemed we kept as slaves. But how different was their condition from that of the slaves in the West Indies, he says. With us, they do no more work than other members of the community. Then even their master, their food, clothes, and lodging were nearly the same as theirs, except that they were not permitted to eat with those who were freeborn. And there were scarcely any other difference between them than superior degree of importance, which the head of the family possesses in our state, and that the authority which, as such, he exercises over every part of the household. Some of these slaves have even slaves under them as their own property for their own use. Very interesting. Very, very interesting for those who just joined us. This book make you just want to keep reading, right? For those who just joined us, this is Olaudah Equiano. Hey, Vector, what's going on? Okay, Sister Vector, oh, say you worked it out. You can hear now. Y'all getting looped audio? How is it now? How's the audio now? Is the audio good now? It's working? All right, I'm not sure what happened there. Firefox wasn't working. Yes, sometimes I have to go to Explorer. Firefox doesn't, it be bugging out. So I have to go to Explorer or Chrome to be able to do it. So hopefully you guys heard me. I finished reading the end. Everything's fine? All right, cool. I just finished reading the end of chapter 5, where he gives a lot of testimony to some of the things that we don't, as a people, not us here, after all of this exchange and conversation, but many of us as a people don't want to come to terms with, that it was people who looked like you, who were maybe your neighbors, who were maybe, who became your enemies, who went into war with you, captured you as prisoners of wars, and sold our foreparents. That's a reality that many people don't want to face. It's easier to say, European, you the one who did it. But the reality is there was a level of that environment that existed already. And that's a question I asked the other day. How were they able to do it? Well, they're telling us pretty plainly how they were able to do it. And this is something that we need to pay heed to. But I'm going to continue. What time is it? I'm going to rock out to 2 o'clock. Oh, no, I'm going to keep going because chapter 2. Oh, I see how he does it. I have like a few more pages to read, so definitely stick with us. We're going to get to chapter 2. All of these were within, I guess, chapter 1. Can you wait? And then I'll give it to you. All right, audio is good. Chapter 6. As to religion, the natives believe that there is one creator of all things, and that he lives in the sun and is girded round with a belt that he may never eat or drink, but according to some he smokes a pipe, which is our own favorite luxury. They believe he governs events, especially our deaths or captivity, but as for the doctrine of eternity, I don't remember to have ever heard of it. Some, however, believe in the transmigration of souls in a certain degree. It says, those spirits which are not transmigrated, such as their dear friends or relative or relations, they believe always attend them and guard them from bad spirits or their foes. For this reason, they always, before eating, as I have observed, put some small portion of the meat and pour some of the drink on the ground for them. And they often make oblations of blood of beasts or of fowls at their graves. I was very fond of my mother and was almost constantly with her. When she went to make these oblations at her mother's tomb, which was kind of a small solitary thatch house, I sometimes attended her. There she made her oblations and spent most of the night in cries and lamentations. I have been often extremely terrified of these occasions. The loneliness of the place, the darkness, the night, the ceremony of libation, naturally awful and gloomy, were heightened by my mother's lamentation, and these, concurring with the doleful cries of birds by which these places were frequented, gave an impressionable terror to the scene. We compute the year from the day on which the sun crosses the line and on its setting that evening. There is a general shout throughout the land, as at least I can speak from my own knowledge, throughout our vicinities. The people at the same time make a great noise with rattles. Hold on. They compute the year from the sun crosses the line. That's interesting. They have a solar new year. Make a great noise with rattles. Yes, when I'm finished, okay? Yay. Unlike the baskets rattles used by children here, do much larger and hold up their hands to heaven for a blessing. It is then the greatest offerings are made, and those children who our wise men foretell will be fortunate are then presented to different people. I remember many used to come to see me, and I was carried about to others for that purpose. They have many offerings, particularly at full moons, generally two at harvest before the fruits are taken out of the ground. And when any young animals are killed, they sometimes offer up a part of them as a sacrifice. These offerings, when made by one of the heads of a family, serve for the whole. I remember we often had them at my father and my uncle's, and their families have been present. Some of our offerings are eaten with bitter herbs. There you go, son of Levi. That's interesting. Some of their offerings are eaten with bitter herbs. We had a saying among us to any of our cross temper that if they were to be eaten, they should be eaten with bitter herbs. Son of Levi, you heard that? That's on page 18, chapter 6. Says here, we practice circumcision like the Jews. There you go. Very interesting. Practice circumcision like the Jews and made offerings and feast on that occasion in the same manner as they did. Like them also, our children were named for some event, some circumstance, or fancied forbearing at the time of their birth. I was named Olaudah, which in our language signifies vicissitude or fortunate. Also one favored. And having a loud voice and well spoken. I remembered we never polluted the name of the object of our adoration. On the contrary, it was always mentioned with the greatest reverence. And we are totally unacquainted with swearing and all those terms of abuse and reproach which find their way so readily and copiously into the language and more civilized people. The only expression of that kind I remember were "may you rot" or "may you swell" or may a beast take you. So he's saying this is how someone would curse someone. May you rot or may you swell or may you. That sounds like the law of jealousy, but I'll continue. I have before remarked that the natives of this part of Africa are extremely cleanly. This necessary habit of decency was with us a part of the religion, and therefore we had many purifications and washings. Indeed, almost as many and use of the same occasions. In my recollection does not fail me as the Jews. It's funny, in 1700, he keeps making reference to the Jews, the Jews, the Jews. Those that touched the dead at any time were obliged to wash and purify themselves before they could enter a dwelling house or touch any person or anything we eat. I was so fond of my mother, I could not keep from her and avoid touching her at some of those periods, in consequence of which I was obliged to be kept out of her house, out with her in a little house made for that purpose till offering was made, and then we were purified. Though we had no places of worship, we had priests and magicians and wise men. I do not remember whether they had many offices or whether they were united in the same persons, but they were held in great reverence by the people. They calculated our time and foretold events as their name imported. For we call them Afuewaka, which signifies calculators of yearly men. Our year beginning called Afu, they wore their beards, and when they died, they were succeeded by their sons. So they didn't cut their beards. Most of their implements and things of value were interred with them. Pipes and tobaccos were also put in the graves with the corpse. Kosha, tell them to come in. Which was always perfumed and ornamented, and animals were offered in sacrifice to them. None accompanied their funerals. Give them some. Give them some. Huh? Some who? No, go ahead and eat that. Go ahead and eat that. I'm on the line. No, I'm not going to give the soup now. None accompanied their funerals but those of the same profession or tribe. These buried them after sunset and always returned from the grave by a different way from which they went. Very interesting. He goes on to say, he calls them magicians. These magicians were also our doctors or physicians. They practiced bleeding by cupping and were very successful in healing wounds and expelling poisons. They had likewise some extraordinary method of discovering jealousy, theft, and poisoning, the success of which no doubt they derived from the unbound influence of the crudelty and superstition of the people. I do not remember what those methods were, except that as to poisoning, I recollect an instance or two, which I hope it will not be deemed impertinent here to insert, as it may serve as a kind of specimen of the rest, and is still used by the Negroes in the West Indies. A young woman had been poisoned, but it was not known by whom. The doctors ordered the corpse to be taken up by some persons and carried to the grave. As soon as the bearers had raised it on their shoulders, they seemed seized with some sudden impulse and ran to and fro, unable to stop themselves. At last, after having passed through a number of thorns and prickle bushes, unhurt, the corpse fell from them close to a house and defaced it in the fall. And the owner being taken up, he immediately confessed to the poisoning. The natives are extremely cautious about poison. When they buy any eatable, the seller kisses it all around before the buyer to show him it is not poison, and the same is done when meat and drink are presented, particularly to a stranger. We have serpents of different kinds, some of which are esteemed ominous when they appear in our house, and these we never molest. I remember 2 of these ominous snakes, each of which was as thick as the calf of a man's leg, and in color resembling a dolphin in the water, crept into my mother's night house, where I always lay with her, and coiled themselves into folds, and each time they crowded like a cock. I was desired by some of our wise men to touch these, that I might be interested in the good omens, which I did, for they were quite harmless, and would tamely suffer themselves to be handled, and then were put into a large open earthen pan and set on one side of the highway. Some of our snakes, however, were poisonous, One of them crossed the road one day as I was standing on it and passed between my feet without offering to touch me, to the great surprise of many who saw it. And these incidents were counted by the wise men and likewise by my mother and the rest of the people as remarkable omens in favor. One more chapter, and then we're going to be up to chapter 2, and then we're going to rest there. This is chapter 7. I don't know, they did it, I guess this is part 7 in chapter 1. Let me just say that. Such is the imperfect sketch which my memory has furnished me of the manners and customs of a people among whom I first drew my breath. And here I cannot forbear suggesting what has long struck me very forcibly, namely the strong analogy which even by this sketch, imperfect as it is, appears to prevail in the manner and customs of my countrymen and those of the Jews. Before they reached the land of promise, and particularly the patriarchs, while they were yet in the pastoral state which is described in Genesis, an analogy which alone would induce me to think that one people has sprung from another. Indeed, this is the opinion of Dr. Gill, who is in his commentary on Genesis, very admirably deduces the pedigree of Africans from Afra, the descendants of Abraham by Keturah, his wife and concubine, for both these titles are applied to her. It is also comfortable to the sentiments of Dr. John Clark, formerly Dean Sarum, in his Truth of Christian Religion, quote unquote. Both these authors concur in ascribing to us this original. The reasoning of those gentlemen are still further confirmed by the scriptural chronology of Reverend Arthur Bedford, and if any further corroboration were required, this resemblance in so many aspects is a strong evidence in support of the opinion. Like the Israelites in their primitive state, our government was conducted by our chiefs or judges or wise men and elders, and the head of a family with us enjoyed a similar authority over his household with that which is ascribed to Abraham and the other patriarchs. The law of retaliation prevailed almost universally with us as with them, and even their religion appeared to have shed upon us a ray of its glory, through broken and spent in its passage or eclipsed by a cloud with which time, tradition, and ignorance might have enveloped it. For we had our circumcision, a rite, I believe, peculiar to that people. We had also our sacrifices and burnt offerings, our washings, purifications on the same occasions they had. As to the difference of color between the Ebodine Africans and the modern Jews, I shall not presume to account for it. So he's like, by this time, those who are saying that they're Yehudim or they're Jews, he's like, yeah, I know we have a lot of similarities, but there's a color problem. Now he said he ain't going to talk about that. I wish he did. It is a subject which has engaged the pens of men, both of genius and learning, and is far above my strength. The most able and Reverend Mr. T. Clarkson, however, in his much admired essay of Slavery and Commerce of the Human Species, I'll say that again, that might be something to look up. Essay of Slavery and Commerce of the Human Species has ascertained the cause in a manner that at once solves every objection on the account, and on my mind at least has produced the fullest conviction. I shall therefore refer to the performance for the theory. Contenting myself with extracting a fact as related by Mr. Mitchell, the Spaniards who had inhabited America under the torrid zone for any time are become as dark colored as our native Indians of Virginia, of which I myself have been a witness. There is also another instance of Portuguese settlement in Mitamba, a river in Sierra Leone, where the inhabitants are bred from a mixture of first Portuguese discoverers with the natives, and are now becoming their complexion and in woolly quality for their hair perfect Negroes, retaining, however, a smattering of Portuguese language. These instances, and a great many more which might be adduced, which they show how the complexion of the same person vary in different climates. He trying to explain away via this person who did why you have so many customs. And again, in today's space and time, the Igbo are considered descendants of Hebrew Israelites. And so in 17, this is 1700s, he's writing this, and he's like, well, we dark skinned and we don't, these Jews that we're seeing today are not. And so he's making an attempt to explain it, which I think is very interesting. Now it says these instances and a great many more, which might be adduced while they show how the complexions of same persons vary, different climates, it is hoped many may tend also to remove the prejudice that some convince against the natives of Africa on account of their color. Surely the minds of Spaniards did not change with their complexions. Are there not causes enough to which the apparent inferiority of Africans may be ascribed without limiting the goodness of God, G-O-D, and supposing he forbear to stamp understanding on what is certainly his own image? Because carved in ebony, quote unquote, I guess he's quoting somebody, might it not naturally be ascribed to their situation when they come among Europeans? They are ignorant of their language, religion, manners, and customs. Are any pains taken to teach them these? Are they treated as men? Does not slavery itself depress the mind and extinguish all its fires and every noble sentiment? But above all, what advantages do not refined people possess over those who are rude and uncultivated? Let the polished and haughty European recollect, he called them polished and haughty, that his ancestors were once like the Africans, uncivilized and even barbarous. Did nature make them inferior to their sons? And should they too have been made slaves? Every rational mind answers no. Let such reflections as these melt the pride of their superiority into symphony for the wants and miseries of their sable brethren, and compel them to acknowledge that understanding is not confined to feature or color. If when they look round the world they feel exultation, no, exaltation, I'm bugging out, let it be tempered with benevolence and others and gratitude to God, who have made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on all the face of the earth. And then he quotes Acts, what's this? 17:26. And whose wisdom is not our wisdom, neither are our ways his ways. That is the very interesting start of chapter 1 of Olaudah Equiano's book. So next time we pick up, we're going to pick up in chapter 2, and we're going to just make our way through. I want to thank everybody for joining us. And like I said at the beginning, congratulations. This is the 100th installment of the LEV project. So we hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to tell a friend, share if you're learning and if you're growing, and let us continue to dispel some of these untrue narratives that we tell ourselves to appease whatever it is that's within that wants to hold on to a certain thought as opposed to the fullness of the truth. So may we all continue to seek truth in its fullness. Until next time, my name is Amuni Israel. Thank you for sticking with it. We'll talk to you again soon. One.